Okay, here's a recent article that shows you another place that we can show that archaeology can reveal perhaps mythology. It's a recent article in from Scientific Reports. It's 64 pages long, and I'm not going to read it all to you. You're welcome. But I am going to try to put it in the comments that I put down below in the pinned comment that I always have at the top. A Tunguska-sized, or much larger, we'll find out, airburst destroyed Tel El Hamman, a Middle Bronze Age city in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea. So this is another event like Tunguska, but they'll mention just shortly at the very start that it was larger than that and its appearance. And it hasn't been fully investigated to the full breadth, let's say, of what it may have affected to this point. And we'll see where it is on the map and things like that, and just do a general talking to it. You can read through it on the article again that I'll put below. The lead-in tells you, we present evidence that in 1650 BC, or 3,600 years ago or so, a cosmic airburst destroyed Tel El Hamman, which is a Middle Bronze Age city in the southern Jordan Valley northeast of the Dead Sea. The proposed airburst was larger than the 1908 explosion over Tunguska, Russia, where a 50-mile wide bolide detonated with 1,000 times more energy than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. So this was much larger than this. And instead of trying to show you a CGI representation, which I originally had loaded up and still loaded up over in the one right left of this and my choices, it'd be better if I described it, because that doesn't give you a right perspective or so on. But it's one of those pictures showing a series of rocks coming to Earth, but it seems to be more headed towards India in the representation that I show. And I've shown this before about 3 times in my other vids, and one of them is that Ozzy Osbourne song that I slowed down and morphed and put to it in Revelation Mother Earth. That must have been over 3 years ago. Anyhow, to get to this point, it's over 1,000 times more energy and more power than the Hiroshima event. They missed, is it Nagasaki? I hope I don't get these mixed up in the two, but they missed Nagasaki by about 1.5 miles, but it's kind of in a bowl area. And because of that, it didn't matter. And because of the size of a nuclear event, it took it way out. But that was almost an air bolide event, for it didn't actually detonate after it hit the ground or at the point of hitting the ground. They had those detonate above slightly. And it makes a difference. One regular of mine made a comment about another event that we talked about like this, and why wouldn't it leave a crater? The reason it wouldn't leave a crater is because it happens above the ground. And one easy way to think of it is that if you were to take something like a grenade, and you were to have a 9-second delay from the point that you ping and you let that thing off, and there you got a pineapple in your hand and you got to get rid of it. A lot of people would throw it right then, but of course it would land and roll and sit there for a couple of seconds still, depending on how far and how high you could throw it. But then that would create a crater in the ground, and anybody within a certain radius would take out. But if you're able to hold the thing for 4 seconds or so, and then take and let it loose and get it good up in the air over the targets that are coming at you or close enough in range for it to affect, it would explode slightly above the ground, shooting shrapnel not just in a little cone out from that area, leaving a crater. And it wouldn't even leave a crater, but it would take out a larger area of effect. kind of like a firework almost hitting the ground and going off if you can get it mentally. But that's not the mental picture I want to give you on this, and we'll go into that in a minute. There's quite a few pictures we can look at and so on, but none that quite put it in perspective of my thoughts whenever I went through this. A citywide 1.5 mile thick carbon and ash rich destruction layer contains peat concentrations of shocked quartz, melted pottery and mud bricks, diamond-like carbon, soot, ferrite, iron, and silica-rich spherules, so little roundlets that are found, which are common with these things. Calcium carbonate spherules from melted plaster, so the little plaster that they had on their houses was vaporized in a way and caused it to immolate off of it like you were to put some incredible torch to it with power real quick, and then it just start fractioning off of it. And melted platinum, which is common, iridium, which is very telling, nickel, which is also found with meteorites and so on, but gold also, and silver, zircon and chromite and quartz. So some of these things don't add up, but what if they had gold at the time? It almost makes you think that some of this stuff might have been vaporized along with what was going on. Or this meteorite that came in could have had gold contacted to it because it's been vaporized out in a layer, little bitty fractionated dust. Or did they have a bunch of gold dust? I could go off on left field about that concept. Let's try to stay a little bit. Heating experiments indicate temperature exceeded 2,000 degrees amid city-wide devastation. The airburst demolished 12 plus miles of the 12 plus meters of the 4 to 5 story palace complex. And the massive 4-meter thick mud brick rampart, while causing extreme disarticulation and skeletal fragmentation in nearby humans, basically obliterated some of them into bits. I'll talk about a little bit. Let's go. An airburst related influx of salt produced hypersalinity in the area, which inhibited agriculture and caused a 300 to 600 year long abandonment of the site. 120 regional settlements, not just the site that we're currently looking at, but places all around. But this was a huge city at the time, one of the largest in the world, and devastated, just and left alone. And then when it got repopulated too, they talk about it in the paper and stuff, that it started off at a meager amount, people doing things, and they started building upon the ruins from before, i.e. leaving the tell, but the tell was already buried. There were stories about this that got passed on through mythologies that we know about today, and some of the other mythologies and folklore has been lost over time in favor of other representations of the same event. Tel El Hamman may be the second oldest city or town destroyed by a cosmic airburst impact after Abu Huraira, Syria, and possibly the earliest site with an oral tradition that was written down. They refer to Genesis. And Tunguska scale airburst can devastate entire city regions and thus pose a severe modern-day hazard. That sounds like somebody after my own heart if you've seen my other videos about this, because the more I found out about this whenever I was younger, the more it kind of scared the hell out of me that we're sitting around with our thumb up our ass and actually not doing anything about it. And then as we got older, I saw movies and things being created about it. One of the familiar close ones had all the Aerosmith songs in it and ta da 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 da, you know, and we're going to go do something about it. And then, well, did we do anything about it? No. Wow. Well, things are zinging by all the time. We've had a few of them here recently. Doing anything about it? No. Looks like it's getting worse. I've showed a video where it seems like this seems to happen in cycles, and we're coming right exactly into the point that things like this happened over and over again in our past in these time cycles. Do anything about it? No. Wow. Severe modern day hazard. I swear they try to turn it into something that would go towards climate change if you gave them an opportunity. Let me say this caused severe climate change in that area for a quick time. Maybe we ought to do something about it. This type things can happen. We see about them. We know about ones that are coming in 10 years and going to be close, and we're, you know, and all kinds of things. We're not doing anything about it. Second oldest city town destroyed by a cosmic airburst known so far, after Abu Huraira. This is the one weird site, kind of a fluke, but maybe not once we've gotten into it, of the Younger Dryas event. So some 10,500 years ago, much before this event right here, dating at 1650 BC. And at that event, it correlates to everything going to crap all across North America. And so it would have been shot with a shotgun of effects and air bursts. And of course, on a continental ice shelf that's nearly 2 miles thick in a lot of places, and so it just vaporized a lot of water and did everything, and then that affected the whole planet. But also Abu Huraira, way over here in Syria, got hit by one of those things. And the visual we can get from it is two different concepts, and I like the first one. The first one is it came in and broke up in pieces, like it does. So another concept of here is you can see whenever it comes in, sometimes they start to break up after they hit the atmosphere because it's like punching into water. Effectively, our atmosphere is so thick compared to what it's been going on to, and it's frozen in space, and it starts to penetrate our atmosphere, and all of a sudden it starts heating up, and the radical difference of that starts fractionating it. Other times it gets pulled on by gravity before that effect, and it comes in, and if it does it from prior to it far enough, they start to spread out a little bit, and then it starts to get a shotgun effect. Some of these simple things like this come in right after each other as a shotgun effect, but if it gets spread out far enough, it's going to come across all North America, and one of them might even lurch and make it across to Iceland and cause that crater that we know. So there's a good chunk that made it out of the deal, but the other ones in burning and going through our atmosphere at such an angle, pardon finger of God here, but if it comes in at such an angle, and you've seen these things like the recent one in Russia, we'll talk about it also later, where it zings across, and in doing so it burns up in the atmosphere. But if you start getting some angle on that, a lot of them will make it through. Also, whenever they break up, they can be impinged upon by the way that works, and all of a sudden start driving into the ground. But it's possibly the earliest site with an oral tradition that was written down in Genesis, and now we have the idea of Lot, and again we have the idea of something like angels, which had come down and caused this super destruction. If you read the story, it's got a whole lot weird to it, and after the fact, actually Lot and his daughters start trying to repopulate the earth, almost like an Armageddon type of event that went on, kind of a prenuptial idea to this idea, or an example. And so whenever I show that in a lot of things, I say, well, it had to do with 10,000 BC because of this huge event then, but then all these other ones seem to be, aha, watch out, here it comes. Things like that. You would think of that as prophets and all this type of things, but bam, here it happens. So you can see here, as you look up from Egyptian Sinai, it's here and stuff, and of course over here is the Nile, but this is the Red Sea, and it breaks through, and at one time it made connections too, and so there's this huge place we know of as the Dead Sea. Has therapeutic salts and everything into it, and you can literally float, and the idea that's told to everybody is nobody's drowned in 3,500 years in this place. It's almost impossible to drown. You see people floating on it, and it looks like they're floating on something, or they're just sitting in a little puddle of water that must be 2 inches thick, but no, they're that much buoyant on it, the way that it works. People use Dead Sea salts for all kinds of things to this day, but this happened right next to it. And of course, there's stories in the Bible where this Sodom and Gomorrah was there. We've also talked about this before, but I guess it's been almost 2 years, how a lot of these temples that they talked about in the ancient times had to do with fertility cults showed phallic symbols and things that go along with this. And so once they find a destroyed thing and they go, oh, well, once they become a much more modest people, or this people that start to inhabit the area again are a much more modest people, then they would say, oh, the reason that that happened is because, especially if they knew about another effect of which. I've talked about this effect also and its possible correlations when they talk about Sosostris from Egypt coming all the way up into that area here and destroying a temple. And Herodotus even talks about a temple in that area that whenever they destroyed them, they were so weak that he drew female phallic symbols all over the temple, and that you could still see some to this day. And then people have correlated the site that I showed you to that, and they show, well, there's male ones too all over the place. But it was common in ancient times all the way up to a point. In fact, we've seen, probably you've seen more than I've even shown, of Pompeii and how it had, though, their red light district and things going on, and they're like phallic symbols. In fact, the dicks actually point to which way it is, like go that way and then go that way. It's on bricks in the ground, and what's going on here? It's also funny. It's like, that's not the red. Which way is this going? That's going to the temple, not to what? The fertility temple here thing on the idea. We still go to fertility doctors. It's a totally different situation now, but let's try to get back on track. So you can see this area that's here. And where it would have come is, well, the Dead Sea Rift breaks through that area. That's the dotted line that you see. And so it's allowed that to come through the area there. And then we've ended up making a pass across that point there, and it's one of the big harbors, and it got shut down not too long ago. It's there. And across the Suez Canal. And of course, a lot of people know that a lot of that was built by the Egyptians in the Wayback Machine, and then that got impinged by a bunch of sediment, and I did a video about it, so on. Another person a long time ago on that video, and I want to do one that's actually about this, not in this video, but isn't it amazing that that was supposed to have been because these people are out in there, and equated to a storm god that had done these things, and then the storm god of the Greeks that are up there is Zeus. And then all the connections I've done with storm gods and so on, but Suez is Zeus backwards, and people don't catch it a lot of the times. In fact, the name of the area that goes right there has to do with nobility. But that's for another video again. So we have this Jordan Valley, and where this would have come, pardon me, finger of God, backwards to the way I'm pointing, instead of coming in somewhat south, it kind of came across this way. We'll see that in one of the depictions where, if you know about a compass, instead of being straight down south, it's south-southwest. It's not southwest and angled over there at the corner, like that. It's really coming across Scow. And so there are huge mountains that are right up in this area too, and in this airburst and heat and everything that goes on there might have helped to melt a bunch of snow that you can even see on the mountains right above the words L and H of Haman that are there existing today. But that feeds the Tigris and Euphrates, and lo and behold, over here it doesn't flow straight down this way, although some of the stuff does off the Caucasus Mountains and all the little ripples off the local area here. But it flows down through that darkened area that you see fertile right there, that's known as the Fertile Crescent, running around and towards a rock, and that's the Tigris and Euphrates. It might have caused a problem, which have caused a flood that has even been found also in archaeology. So quite a few things can be correlated, and perhaps this dating here, what's strange about location, dating, and everything too, is that we know now that, well, we're not too far off the dating that everybody's always had for the Hyksos. Right? But now we know, and I've showed a recent video, it's been almost a year ago now, at least around 8 or 9 months, that the Hyksos had been there from long before that, and it wasn't really this big event, but this one wave of big event helped to show up. And all of a sudden, the new things showed up, such as the chariots, the wheel that goes along with it, axles, the way that works, but also advanced weapons, advanced metallurgy, all kinds of things. Oh, and they believed in that storm god idea. Well, basically the sky god that we've talked about so repeatedly. But then if we look at that, and this happening right here, maybe there's a reason that there's these people that used to be up in here that we've talked about ended up going to there and living all around here, and ended up being the people that a lot of people, including Josephus, equated to the Exodus situation of the Bible. And we've had other videos about that. In fact, I've done a whole series about Exodus. Probably just look it up. We've also done videos about how they said the parting of the Red Sea and so on, and that actually the words are Reed Sea. And so when these people went out through the Sea of Reeds, which is the way it actually reads in all your oldest Bibles and everything, check into it, is across this area and through here, and doesn't even involve the Red Sea. And an idea that we have of it parting in a concept is more of a swamp area of Sea of Reeds than it ever was that incredible idea where they come out here and then run around in a circle for a generation, get their crap back together, and then try to take over another area again, which again correlates probably to the time we're talking about. But lo and behold, there's also a connection, because right over here there is that ancient wall of Jericho, and it doesn't actually equate to the time that's supposed to equate the time of Jacob. In fact, none of the sites that supposedly he ran through and ransacked at one point correlate to one certain people doing it or another. Some are Akkadians and so on. But strangely, if we're going to give a leeway of 15 to 18 years on either side of this, I think, to the latest dating, which hell is back in the 90s if I remember, but maybe even sooner, correlates and fits well with whenever the wall of Jericho fell down, and it's not far enough away with some idea like this having the concussive power of doing that. The power of angels. Well, angels, I've shown in some of my videos, are connected to stars. And still to this day, we call these things that look like this falling stars. In fact, I'm about to do another Halloween presentation where we'll talk about meteor showers and stars again. But in that effect, this thing came screaming right down the Red Sea, or Dead Sea Rift, Wonder why they call it the Dead Sea. Well, other than the fact that it's dead, it doesn't have animals in it. The salinity's so high, it's just... But wham, seems like it leads right into that area. A falling star can be equated to an angel. So whenever angels destroy this city in the Bible, one could take a mythological standpoint and realize this is the equation. Some of you might have the idea that there's an angel standing out here about the point of view that we're looking at and decided to grab a hold like Superman, a rock, and throw it down right at him, like a baseball. Or pick something up from way out in the klitsch that's out past all the planets and decide to grab one of those big chunks and throw it in, and knew exactly the way the world was spinning to where it would hit just this one city and everything. You can go with all these ideas, finger of God, if you will, but that's what we're looking at as a reality that has happened. Archaeology shows this, and a lot of people, due to the dating, want to make that connective. And so you can see, if you're standing up on this hill, or where we are now, the Dead Sea in the distance over here at the left, and the temple and palace that's run through here, and this kind of rift, which, finger of God again, is running through at an angle. A bit here, pointing that way, due to natural erosion and so on, but then this giant tell was built over it. Now that it's been excavated, and you can see this house that's done down here, and things onto it, it doesn't look the way that it was, but this was another one of those cases where, wonder what's up under that little mound right there. Well, it's not that little, but hey. So this is the location of Tel El Hamman, shown from a photograph of the southern Levant above the first picture we were looking at, looking north, showing the Dead Sea site location in nearby countries, the Dead Sea Rift, and the fault line marking the major tectonic boundary plate runs through the area. And the source of the image is from NASA back in 2009. And then we have this other one here, the west-southwest facing view of the Tell, showing locations of the palace temple behind the curve of the upper wall, and the Dead Sea is in the background to the left. So this is almost the angle, but not quite. Almost like my hand was at the angle where it actually came through. And you can imagine if something like this happened, people in this area would probably, well, they'd be vaporized, to be honest with you, but anybody that existed, which they believe could encompass a 25-mile area at this point, and probably it stretches out real long, stretching down that way to the left and stretching farther, but not excavated up here to the right. And let me say this, when it came in and exploding, of course it's coming in at an angle right here and burning up and going across, and so it caused this explosion, which was like, well, 100 times the size of Hiroshima, but being 10 of them, therefore equaling 1,000, stretching out in a line as it exploded and erupted and broke into pieces that are the size of your house. But it's going along at 75, slowing down to 35,000 miles an hour, and that rapid heating and explosion and kinetic energy that it caused, like a shotgun running across here, and just the explosive concussive effect off of it exploded over this tell. And by the science and all the archaeology that is showing here, it looks like that effectively, in a way of saying it, is that they shot a firework off, and it was so close that whenever it exploded, a lot of that sparkage, if you will, hit the ground, embedded into pottery, art, walls, all kinds of things, and people themselves, right? So this is one that I talked about 3.5 years ago now, and I was waiting for a dating on it, and we talked about blah 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 and Lot and things like that. So let's go on to another depiction and another part. For this is showing you the palace that's there, and here they give it a 4-story representation, but it's 4 or 5, they're not quite sure, and you can see it's built up in a situation that looks very much not unlike the sites of near Göbekli Tepe, of Catalhoyuk and places like that, and this adobe-ish type idea, and they're building in this plaster that's almost a concrete, and yet I've shown recently people having concrete floors, terrazzo floors, so on. But there's already a city built up to 2 levels that's around it, 1, 2, so then the palisade area, if you will, would have been 3, 4, 5 top, 3, 4, 5 in the distance, but there's no 3, it's really 4 or 5, so it's a huge room, if you will. And you can even see on the left side of it there in the picture, there's another 3-story place with 2 stories and then a little third on top, but I guarantee you they could get on top of that, an observatory, and do all types of astronomical things going on. No one knows if this happened during the day, in the bright near noon, during a time of the year where it would have been almost obscured by the sun coming in and looked like a piece of the sun just let loose. Stories in the Greeks of the sun god that pulls across the sun, but his son himself wanted to prove it and wanted to fly his chariot and did a burning too, but apparently the direction that came, so it was earlier than this, and we've talked about that in other videos, was from across a different direction across the Mediterranean where it said he fell, and things like that. Of course, that's the way the sun's path somewhat goes too, but different correlations. This might be the reason for, well, looks like the reason for the Hyksos to have shown up in Egypt. Because it correlates a little bit to that time. Extremely close, and it really wasn't that singular event. We've even showed on the walls where it looks like they're coming in and so on, and they've got their kids and things with them and stuff. They're moving into the area. Whenever they did, they gave praise and did so on, but as things started to fall apart for them, they took over Egypt for a while there. Then were driven back out. So here we see the excavation point on it, and this place has all been shattered down to a point. And this isn't the representation where I want to really give you that mental idea here of what kind of went on in the area. But what's also strange is that it's been well noted that that's kind of an iron-rich area, and we're leading into an area called the Black Desert because it's got that dark extra to it. You can see it over the left here and all in there. And a lot of that's contained iron. In fact, just little bitty bits of iron. And how can you get it out of that in any way? Well, you can take a magnet, get a good enough one, and drag it around with you, and you can actually pick up quite a bit. So that's an artist's representation here of the palace. And this is a representation of that palace after it's been destroyed and then re-excavated back down to the point that where it happened and was not touched again for over 600 years. And whenever it did, there was a whole level above this of excavation. And when they got into this area, it started involving a few more people, because whenever they got into this, lo and behold, there became this charcoal layer. And a simple look at it showed you all those shattered crystals and things like that. And wow. So that started involving some of these experts about that. But so the MB2 part of the excavation marks the top of 1650 BCE Middle Bronze Age rubble. Note that the field around the excavation is essentially flat, unlike the view in panel A. Originally, parts of the 4-story palace were 12 meters tall, but afterwards only a few courses of mud bricks at bottom porous remained on stone foundations labeled as wall remnants. Part of the foundation of this massive wall in the palace is at the bottom. Debris from between sheared walls has been removed by excavation. A comparison of panel A to panel B shows millions of mud bricks from the upper parts of the palace and other buildings missing. Facing the other way, a little bit over here, I think, in representation of where they say things are, they have found that when the wall came through there, whenever that concussive wave came through there, it burst in that direction. We'll show it in another representation of arrows and things that go along with it. But that piece of sheared wall, remnants of those mud bricks and parts of the upper part of it, were found hundreds of yards farther in the distance. Someone said probably even over those hills. Like you can see in here, it's flat to a point. Let me see if I can get this down. It's flat to a point, but then there becomes this ridge and it goes over a hill. It blew pieces of it to where it didn't even try to hit the ground. It blew and got over that whenever this concussion happens. Much like you would think of in some nuclear test footage that you've seen, right? Are good representations in CGI, you know, like in Terminator and things like that. This idea of what happened to these people. So it blew apart a rampart too that they have here leading up into the city, it being on a tail. So this walk up and so on, that was 12 meters thick, and it looked like it just disintegrated because it got hit just off angle from the concussion that came in. And here we can see part of the destruction layer that they show here. And looking at this, there are these creases and black marks that are in there, but that's actually cavities. What is that? That is the organic debris that they have from all the upper stories, that whenever everything got blown over and trapped up under it, was instantly ignited because of over 2,000 degrees at one time. This singe that went on more than a minute or two and ended up frying this place into igniting and then trapping it under, and then they smoldered up under this debris, and a lot of these people were trapped in this exact same layer of debris that you're seeing here, and it's this top layer of debris and then part of the blowover that had blown over on top of it. But the foundation layer is way down here, and then there's an inset floor, so there's already a couple layers going on here when this happened. Also, the fact that it was buried pretty much instantly should leave these carvings and things looking real well, but the reason that they don't is because they were subject to over 2,000 degrees in a bisque for a moment, and just singed the hell out of them, along with everything else that went on. So they even say these voids are layers formed whenever trapped textiles, rugs, and tapestries and things burned, leaving only fibrous ash and carbon inside of them, and blowover, the top part in blue, is comprised of windblown, laminated, burned deposits that sealed the ruined structure for 3,600 years. Beginning at the time of destruction, number 4, at the very top there, marks fragments of white limestone plaster and calcium carbonate mixed with carbonate spherules from the palace walls and ceilings, and the scale stick has a 10 centimeter markings there on each section. So this was a rapid thing. In fact, they'll show another picture to it. Again, I don't want to read all of this to you, but here is the scale showing you these things that had melted there, and the equilibrium melted formula due to the temperature. So potassium chloride and salt itself was actually fused in heat, but silver and gold melted, which go at 961 and 1064. Copper, they found there melted too. Iron phosphate, iron sulfate. So there was a large amount of iron in here. And I wonder how much is there, if any, they want to give previous to the point and was shattered in any way and fractionated due to this heat and melted, as they say in a lot of the things, or again, this was pieces of this meteor that, like a firework, actually hit the ground. Sediment itself, which was silicate rich, like sand, was fractionated and also almost turned into glass. This instantly makes me think of the Sea of Glass that's in Libya, deeper off in the desert, off of Egypt, and a whole area that got hit there one time, and it's fractionated. And I've done videos about it. In fact, I used it in one of my old Dungeons and Dragons campaigns in an idea that people could ski across it with blades that looked like giant swords that were put under the bottom of them, and they used it just like you would on ice. Because that I adapted it from one that went off of that. Let's continue. Melted mud brick. So mud bricks, which can be fired, and they get it up 500-600 degrees on these guys, right? And this makes that cured brick that we have, and it actually is magic. It turns mud into stone. You can take that to another level if you get it up around 1400 degrees, and mud brick will actually melt. But no, it passes that. These are just a scale running through here, people. Native silicon that's there was melted. There's ferrite-rich spherules, which happen at about 1420 degrees. They've calibrated, but nickel, iron, wollastonite, which is a calcium silicate, magnetite. So this titanium ferrite combination, 1500 degrees, iron oxide, spherules, melted pottery, calcium phosphate, tin itself, 1600 degrees. No, we passed that way up. Calcium phosphate, zircon, quartz, platinum, titanium sulfide, chromium, magnesium oxide, calcium, silicate, chromate, lanthanum, iridium, and calcium oxide. And this iridium that they're showing is something that you find really not native to our planet, but actually from meteor strikes. Here we get another idea of the length and breadth of this, and it kind of ran across it in an angle about like this. And it looks like it was pretty much directly over it as it ran through there. And before we ever got to it, there were explosions happening and so on, lifting up a lot of the salt out of the Dead Sea and all of that, and causing this salt and salinity problem to the earth that made it not worth using there. And of course, Lot and his wife, when it's the salt and things go on to it. And these people in this area are famous for taking that red sea salt and putting it on this flat, polished floor. They pour a lot of this red sea salt in there, and then they let it dehydrate up, and it turns into crystals, and there's salt, and then they scrape it all up. I actually used to get natural native red sea salt from the Red Sea that's done in that same method, and then they take it into it. Well, they used to not do it, so this caused all kinds of screw ups, and sometimes it would have sandstorm dirty and all kinds of things, but they started testing it more and putting back exact and slightly elevated levels of what you needed into it. But the basis of it wasn't like Morton salt anymore. It actually had all 70 trace elements that are found in natural seawater, although some of them were lacking and so on like that too. But that's for another video if I ever talk about it, and a lot more saltwater things that I've done some videos about. So you can see this whole area and how it rings from here. And whenever they talk about they found these things in the Wadi and in the ring road and in the temple and in the palace there, you can see how spread out of an area it is. And this thing was a huge city that all went around it, and for about 24 kilometers had little satellite little cities all around it, and they all were destroyed simultaneously when this happened here.